Hey guys, I'm back. Part 2, the difficult second book, the difficult second pass for Poker Video Instructional Series, has a nice ring to it. So I'm sure you know I'm the TheDefinitiveArticle for Grinder School. I'm making a video review of hands I've played over the past week, mostly 50 NL, but there's been some 100 NL in there, but I don't think there's going to be any more. Jack 9 suited, standard open from the button, standard call against a 3-bet, especially considering he's resealing pretty decently often. I think he's probably going to be using a depolarized small blind 3-betting strat here, so it's good to have a hand at 3-bet that plays pretty well against a wide range. I remember this hand and I think I played it absolutely terribly, so this is going to be a point of embarrassment of mine. He c-bets, and I think this is weak enough that we can just fold here. He's not c-betting often at all, 44%, so if anything we could probably overfold against his bets. I think we can, pretty much. I think Jack 8, 10 Ace of Hearts would certainly be strong enough to continue. Jack Ace of Hearts is certainly closer. Jack 9 of Hearts, I think we should just fold. As you may be able to guess, I don't fold. I call, being a clever little floating bastard. And for turn to 10, we turn a gut shot. So I think I start by betting here, and I think I should, especially considering how high this hand is, how low this hand is in my range, the fact that we've got some equity, and the fact that exceptions will overfold turns after checking here. So in terms of sizing, I think we're just looking at the sizing that we can threaten stacks on the river for roughly pots. So if we bet 10, there'll be 31 to 38.50 on the river. That's fine. 75% pot, not that much difference. So 10 is good. On this river, after we check calls a turn, I think we can just exploitatively not have a bluffing range. Let's consider what he c-bets and check calls a turn. He's c-betting and then check calling a turn with probably a decent amount of ace-x, which he's probably going to think, shit, nothing hit, I don't want to fold this. He's probably not c-betting, and he's probably not c-betting kings through jacks, so we can't fold those out. He's probably not check calling the turn with any draws. He probably is check calling the turn with a 10, which he obviously isn't for if we jam, because we can be jamming ace-x of value here. So I think this is a spot where we just want to not have a bluffing range exploitatively, because I think he's not going to distinguish appropriately between the ace-x. Because fundamentally a lot of the ace, jack and worse are essentially the same strength against our value range here. Let's say ace 9 worse actually. And he probably has all the suited combos of those. And that's a whole ton of combos. Considering he also probably has all the combos of ace, queen and ace, jack here. Probably a whole bunch of combos of king 10, queen 10, jack 10, 10, 9 and 10, 8. I think he's probably going to call too much with a weak ace without really considering how he can fold, or how he ought to fold part of his range, and also without really coming up with any particular strategy for deciding which ace-x to fold. So I think this ought to be a check back, but I jam, just thinking, well, on the plus side for jamming here, this is one of the best combos to be jamming as a bluff with, because we never win at showdown. We don't block diamonds, although it's not especially relevant. We do block ace jack, ace 9, jack 10, 9 10. But we don't really block jack 10 that well, because it probably only has suited combos anyway. Or 10 9 for that matter. But still, I think, as I said, I just think it's a spot where we can be exploitatively bluffing very little. And very little to not at all. I think not at all is probably the best bluffing frequency here, and he calls and he has ace queen, so I just think that's The river's a pretty clear spot where I missed a big and madly profitable exploitative adjustment there. I also think the flop is played pretty badly by me. Here we face an open limp and a small blind. We're just assuming it's a fish. We're about 200 deep, and we get called when we raise. Don't see any merit to see betting this flop. We don't really protect that well against anything. I mean, sometimes it's going to have 9-8 and hit a 9 or an 8 on the turn, but it's not a good enough reason to bet when we don't get folds from better or calls from worse, really often at all. Turn no flush draw. We're obviously not folding against a half pot bet. River trips, and he bets 3x pos. This is a spot against a fish where I think I ought to be folding. If it is a reg I knew was balanced, this is just a super snippy, snappy call. We block a ton of flush. We block most of his flush combos, which you can do this with sometimes. And we obviously block a ton of boats with the 4, but against the fish, I just think we should be assuming close to 100% value here and just folding. But because I'm not thinking properly, I call and run into a straight, which is far too thin to overbet in this spot, by the way. I mean, the fact that I'm considering folding trips should make that pretty obvious. Trips top kicker, no less. So, yeah, I think, I mean, obviously, our opponent played the hand badly, but I think this indicates the value of making exploitative deviations against fish. We certainly need to learn to fold against overbets of fish, except in the spots where they make absolutely no sense whatsoever. Getting 5 to 1 pre, we can't fold 10 to 6 deuce against 2 wide ranges. The button's a reg. I think the small blind was a fish. I can't be certain, no. I'll just look up my notes. KJ and Kala. Okay, no, I only notice that they're hidden from search. So I think this can go one of two ways. We can either raise, which I think is reasonable. It's probably just about strong enough that we want to, that we don't hate being 3-bets. We certainly don't have to fold against a 3-bet. Or we can call. I think calling is probably superior. Jacks and the diamonds, I think, is better to raise call. Or something with much less equity. So, for instance, 10-7 offsuits would be better to raise. Fold. Maybe Queen Jack of hearts, something. But yeah, I think this is the sort of thing where we definitely want to continue. We can definitely profitably call, but we hate life if we get 3-bets. So I think just calling is best. Facing a raise, we're getting fantastic odds to continue with 12 outs once, 12 outs twice even. I mean, we might not see the river, but we don't need to, considering we're calling 5 into 14, getting nearly 3 to 1, which is huge. We're almost getting odds if we're calling all in here. Well, no, we are getting odds if we're calling all in, but we'd almost be getting odds if we were calling all in on the turn here. That's how clear a call this is in terms of pot odds. We turn a disguised nut hand, and to be honest, I think from a balanced perspective, check raising here is definitely fine. We have Jack 10, we have 10-6 obviously, we probably have 6-5 diamonds, so we have sufficient combos to justify developing a check raise range, and we probably have top set combos too. We also have a ton of combos that we can use as a bluff, so we can definitely be balanced in this spot. And I think our sizing here is pretty good. We're leaving not much behind on the river, but we're leaving it enough to have we're leaving, what, 34 to 73, so we're leaving enough to have some fold equity with our bluffs. Yeah, and we're leaving enough that the button can just about think that they have fold equity to 3-bet jam here, although obviously they don't when we hold 10-6 diamonds. They get called. We get called. Now I think we're essentially up against mostly sets here. I think Jack 10 just rips in here without diamonds, and we block the 10 of diamonds. Sometimes we're playing against a nut flush draw, but I certainly think those start to consider folding the turn, especially without the 6 or 10 of diamonds, because they're not going to get paid easily when they hit, and their overcards are basically useless against our value range, especially considering they're not really wanting to call all in when they just hit an overcard. So I think we are mostly playing against sets when this happens. And for that reason, especially when it's the ace of diamonds, thus removing any nut flush draws from our opponent's range, I think it's a pretty easy jam for value. We could even go smaller because we don't really have that many bluffs here, but I think people just struggle to fold a set so much that that we can just jam and exploitatively hope they don't fold. And I'm guessing by show 87 fold the set, but well done. But maybe they didn't. Still, I think that illustrates the idea that we need to consider how our range interacts with our opponent's range, who has a nut, who doesn't, when deciding whether to develop aggressive ranges on every street. A nit 3x is a button. They're 25%ing the button over small sample, so it's not a big deal, but there is a fish in small blinds that might indicate they have a stronger range than normal. So I think 10s we can't really 3-bet in the big blind. Flops a very standard check call. I want to talk about donking this turn. Now, most people just never donk the turn, and that's fine. You're not going to miss a whole ton of money. I think it is a small leak though. You probably want to donk the turn. In fact, let's talk about why you don't donk the turn first. Normally you don't donk the turn because the aggressor's range tends to be stronger, in that it tends to be uncapped, so there tends to be this set of hands which they can value bet for any size, and they can raise against any bet. This isn't really the case here. The reason being that when the second card pairs, all of a sudden the caller has a whole bunch of hands which make trips, and the flop c-better doesn't really have any of those because they're checked back to the flop with most of them. Sometimes they have a few combos of boats which the flop caller doesn't, but I think it's still enough to justify not enough to justify not developing a donking range on this type of turn. Now let's talk about the sizing. On particularly dry flops, the sizing should be very small. We're talking maybe a fifth of the pots. The reason being that the flop caller won't have many bluffs at all in their range. So let's say the flop is ace-7-2 rainbow, the turn is an offsuit 7. But what can the flop caller be bluffing with there after check calling the flop? Sometimes king queen is a backdoor flush draw, king jack with a backdoor flush draw, but that's 6 combos total. Whereas if they're donking their entire range, which is what I'd recommend when you do develop a strategy like this, because otherwise you leave yourself with a very weak checking range. It's just nearly impossible to balance 2 ranges there. Then They also have a whole ton of ace-x combos which can be legitimately be called value hands. They have a lot of trips hands. They're probably uncapped, except for aces. So they have pocket twos. Maybe they have ace-7, depending on positions. I mean, in extreme situations, they may even have 7-2 suited. But certainly they have a lot more value hands and bluffs than hands which really want to fold. So I think that explains its more sizing. Now here, that's not quite the case, because we're probably going to start check calling this flop with some flush draws, or some straight draws which now want to fold. And for that reason, I think our turn sizing here is a bit small, although the pot wasn't quite as big, because Poker Tracker doesn't correctly account for rake, and this was slightly under half pots, and I think we probably want to go more like 55% pots on this turn. So I think donking our entire flop calling range on this turn is a very good strategy. We get raised. Something about this strategy is that people are going to react very differently to it. Some are just going to fold. I've seen people fold top pair when people do this, which is frankly absurd. I've also seen people raise absolutely everything, nearly less. That was a nasty word there, and that wouldn't be good for the undoubtedly naive grammar school audience. So yeah, we can't really fold against this raise in case we're playing against a source that just raises everything. And also let's remember that because it is big blind against button, although our opponent 3x pre, so ranges are a little bit tighter, ranges are still quite wide, so our turn donking range is pretty wide, and this is therefore pretty high in that range. So we do call. Now the river's interesting. Now we have quads, but we also don't really have any nutted hands apart from that. We probably have pocket eights. Our opponent has aces through jacks, which can probably be value bets very easily. The flush draw missed. That has an effect on both our and our opponent's ranges. So I think those effects roughly cancel each other out. We have some air, our opponent has some bluffs. And we have a lot of middling hands, like pocket fives here. Although we might bet fold the turn, so this is actually quite close to the bottom of our range, I think. We do have a lot of ace-x though. We start by checking. I think that's pretty clear. After getting raised on a turn, we don't have range advantage on this river. So we don't really want a donking strategy. Our opponent jams for 1 1/3 times the size of the pot. Normally I'd snap fold this. It's pretty low in our range. We don't have to defend very often at all. It's probably like 40% of our overall range, so it's our minimum defense frequency, I think. And against a nit, we're just assuming that they're overbetting the nuts only. However, I've seen this guy. I have a note on this guy. I'll just bring it up for you guys. The second note is from this hand, so I'll just show you the top notes. I've seen him overbet bluff a river, representing absolutely nothing against the caps range. So, considering our range in this spot is actually uncapped, and thus is also an inappropriate spot to overbet, I think he's often going to be spewing here. And especially considering a lot of draws missed, our turn line can serve to induce spew a decent bit. I think is a spot where we can start making an exploitative call. We don't expect to be ahead all of the time. I think he's probably going to hit his line with a 4 or pocket 8. So I'm not sure he overbets aces through jacks. And this narrowing of his value range clearly reduces his value to bluff ratio, and thus should increase the probability, should make us more inclined to call. Um, and basically this means that we're making an exploitative call because we think his overbet range is going to be bluff heavy. Unfortunately, he has top boat, but, you know, win some, you lose some. I need to take a drink. You can probably hear my voice cracking a bit. Oh, crikey. So I'm sure you can see what's happened pre here. Against a red, I prefer checking this flop. I don't currently open even ace-2 through ace-5 suited under the gun, so ace-jack is pretty low in my range of ace-x on this flop after opening under the gun. So I think it serves pretty well as a range protection check. And this guy, if anything, is folding too much to c-bets, 9 out of 15 so far. So it's a spot where we'd probably want to bluff heavy c-bet range by both adding bluffs and removing value hands. So that adds to reasons for checking. Obviously we check calling the flop is the top of our checking range pretty much. We have aces, but that's not really something we care about that much because there's so few combos. Turn again, it's still very high in range. We want to check call. River's a 9. I'd recommend pausing the video and thinking about the last hand, talking about donking ranges, and ask yourself why we wouldn't want to donk this river. And I'm going to stop talking for 5 seconds, so I recommend pausing the video and writing an answer down. That'll give you some pride if you get it right, and allow you to test yourself. So, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The reason we don't want a river donking range in this spot is because we don't actually have any 9x in our range. We fold them on the turn. Moreover, our opponent has boats a greater portion of the time here than they do in a big blind against button scenario. So donking this river here would be daft. We don't have range advantage in any way. So we definitely want to start by checking. Our opponent bets back, checks back, and that's basically where the intrigue of the hand ends. Check back ace queen, which I think is a horrendous river check. You certainly need to be value betting that. It beats so much of our range, but I guess this is where we profit from against regs. Nit's gonna nit, and so on and so forth. Ace king on the button, under the gun's pretty nitty, pretty bad. Get caught by the big blind as well. The HUD will show up in a minute. And this flop's pretty close between a bet and a check. Under the gun is opening 16%, but only c-betting 46%, so they probably have a decently protected range here. However, I'd probably exclude queen x from their range. Because the big blind's getting 3.5 to 1 pre, you probably have a pretty wide range. The reason, so especially considering we have all sorts of backdoors, backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, and overcards, that alone would look to make it a pretty clear bet. We have decent fold equity and we have decent pot equity. The argument for a check is that we can check down ace king and win it showdown a decent percentage of the time, and that's the reason I think this should be a flop check. I think betting ace jack with a heart is certainly best, because both of these players can have ace king in this spot, and thus ace jack has significantly less showdown value. But ace king I think is strong enough to check here. Turns basically a blank, and the small blind bets. Now, this is his range is the only range on this turn which is uncapped. Both myself and under the gun would have bet queen x on the flop. I mean, possibly pocket queens check, but that's one combo, so again, I wouldn't really bother thinking about it that much. However, because our ranges are quite weak, it's also the case that ace king is pretty high in our range here. It's also a better hand to call with than pocket fives, and again, I'd recommend quitting yourself here. So pause the video, write it down, And I'll say the answer in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ace King is a better hand to check here than small pocket pairs, say pocket 4s, pocket 5s, to call rather. Because when it's behind, it can improve to win. Our opponent's definitely betting jacks through 9s here for value, or at least he should be. And Ace King has 6 outs against those, whereas pocket 5s has 2 outs, even though it's a better absolute hand. Our opponent is also almost certainly not betting a hand which pocket 5s beats but Ace King doesn't. And our opponent's bluffs have probably the same or less equity against Ace King than they do against pocket 5s, because he nearly always has at least 2 overs against pocket 5s. So I think this places Ace King higher in our range in terms of quality for calling than pocket 5s. And, well, pocket 4s through pocket 7s in general. Perhaps not pocket 7s, because our opponent can sometimes bet pocket 7s himself. But certainly it's high enough to justify a call. We do share the defence responsibility with Under's gun, but there is, against this size bets, I mean, we have to defend a combined total of about 60% off the top of my head, maybe a bit more, let's say 65%. His range is slightly stronger than ours, so let's give him about 35% of that, but it's not a huge amount stronger, so that's why it's only 30%, so we have to defend about 30% of our range. Because we do check back, we probably don't have many jacks through 9s combos in our range, etc. So Ace King is certainly in the top 30% of our range in terms of quality for calling. And I wouldn't really recommend deviating from this unexploitable calling approach in this spot, because we have no read on whether this guy is going to be value heavy or bluff heavy in this spot. Possibly he's a little bit bluff heavy because his c-betting stats are higher than most, and his stabbing stats are pretty high. So we can assume he's going to be betting pretty often, but that certainly would point against folding Ace King rather than in favour of it. The river's jack. Now let's think about that. What does that do to his range? Do you think, as a view, do you think he still value bets 10s or 9s here? Regardless of whether he should, do you think he actually does? Because I think he doesn't. I think maybe he should, because realistically we don't have a queen, we probably don't have a jack very often. But I think he's probably going to see, if he has a queen or a jack, I'm behind. And he's probably going to pussy out and check. Probably check call, but still check. I don't think he has that many combos of Queen X. I don't think he has that many combos of Jack X. We block both Queen X and Jack X. We beat all his bluffs. And that makes this hand pretty much the best hand in our range to call with. Apart from 8s, but we're raising that, and that's only 3 combos here. So I think this is a spot where we need to call Ace King and just chalk it up to variance if we lose. If we had a read that he was going to bluff this spot less often than most, then we could fold, and indeed fold all our bluff catches as an exploitative play. But we don't have that read, and so I think this hand is best to call. And the moral of the story, before we get to showdown, is that absolute strength is perhaps not the best way to rank hands in deciding which hands to use for your calling ranges, even on the river. If 2 hands both beat your opponent's bluffs and lose to their value bets, then you should probably be looking for some other distinguishing factor rather than absolute strength in deciding which to call with. And on the river, that's probably going to be blockers. So he shows up with Ace Queen, which he's going to some percent of the time, of course, but I think the hand's a pretty easy call. He can have a ton of hearts here. Like, he probably calls it as wide as 6-4 suited pre in hearts, so I don't think we can fold there. Yeah, so the hand not so long ago was against this guy, We didn't really have any reads on him then, and we still don't now. Standard 3-bet of Ace King. I think this flop ought to be a check call. Ace King, we don't have to check fold, and even if we did, it wouldn't be a big deal because Ace King here is losing often and doesn't really have that robust equity. It hits an ace or a king and it's not that delighted. So I guess against this size I think we have to call, but check call and check fold are both reasonable lines. I think check calling is marginally better. We turn an ace. We have ace 5 and ace 4 in our range. Our opponent has ace queen, but we also have ace king and ace jack, and he doesn't, because ace king and ace jack check back the flop for him. So I think this is a good spot to develop a turn donking range. We don't have that many bluffs because we c-bet nearly all our flush draws. So I think we need to be betting pretty small here, probably $6 to $7 at most. But I think this is another good spot to develop a turn donking range. And I'm glad I made that play. Our opponent calls, and again we still don't have many bluffs on this river, but I think we can often expect some pretty spewy calls from a queen here, so I think ace king is strong enough to value bet. Pardon me. Especially considering we can probably start bluffing 10s, 9s here if we have them. So I think that sizing is roughly good because we fundamentally don't have that many bluffs, and that's the sort of sizing a queen might call without really thinking too much. So, and we do see a call from queen 10, which I think is probably a loose call I think it's a loose river call, but I think it's not too bad the way our opponent played the hand. Pretty standard re-steal, jack 9 suited, flop big, and when our opponent calls this flop, we don't expect him to be very strong very often, especially seeing as he's raising a whole bunch of flop c-bets, so we think he's capped heading into this turn. I don't really like overbet jamming this turn, but with that said, even though in theory it's a good spot to do it, well, not in theory per se, because of the limited stack size. But the reason why I don't think overbet jamming this turn is that good because we can still get the money in easily over 2 streets anyway. So I think the turn should definitely be a barrel. We have so much equity, and we don't expect him to really have a raising range here. If he does, we probably have to suck it up and fold just because he can be bluffing better hands so often, but I don't expect him to really have a value raising range here, and if he does, we're just not folding any made hand and it's suicidal for him. So we barrel. I mean, it's pretty standard size. We leave a decent amount left behind on the river. Pardon me. And the river's close. I say it's close. Think about what you expect him to show up with here. Do you think he shows up with a king very often? Not very often. He probably has a few combos, a king-queen, especially with spades or clubs. But obviously we lose to king-queen of clubs. But he can have hands with a single club, king-queen. King-jack as well, with spades or a single club. He can have ace-7. He can probably have 8-7 suited. And he can have flushes. We block a lot of flushes, and because suited hands don't make that many combos, there aren't that many combos of flushes. So we're clearly ahead of the range that we expect to call if he always calls with a king and a 7. If he starts folding 7s ever, then no, we don't want to be jamming it. But let's also note that if we check, we're not delighted about calling. He might not even value jam a river, a 7 on this river. I think we have to jam them here because we do expect to be ahead often when we get called. But the fact that we don't have to check fold, but the fact that we don't check call extremely profitably with this hand, despite it being so high in our range, strengthens the case for value betting even more. So we do jam. We do have some bluffs here. We have all combos of 9-8 suited, so that's 3 combos of bluffs. Probably all combos of 10-8 suited. That's 3 combos there. 10-9 suited, 3 combos there. Possibly some stuff with the ace of clubs, but I'm not sure I'd barrel the turn with that. But I think that's plenty of bluffs to justify jamming for this size. And I tanked for about a minute before calling and before jamming, and he snap calls with king queen with no clubs. I think it's a pretty marginal call from him, but and certainly the flop call is pretty shocking. But his river call is not too bad. It's pretty borderline, but it's probably okay. Middle position opener, right, unknowns all around. Well, he's a short stack, so assuming he's fishy, and the cutoff's a reg, so I think it's pretty standard squeeze. Making it, normally I make it 650 because it's only got a 60 big blind stack. I'm making it a bit smaller, and we get called in 2 spots. We flop top pair, but it's usually wet flop. Without a fish in the pot, I'd start by checking here. I mean, the case for checking is stronger if we have the king of diamonds, but certainly I think against 2 regs we can check here anyway, just because our hand A isn't that high up in our range, and B, our range isn't that strong relative to our opponents, given their pre-flop ranges. Considering we probably have aces and queens, but they have 9s and we don't. They have ace queen and we don't. But with the fish in the pot, I think we start by betting. The sizing is so if the red calls, I can thrust into jam 34 into 38 on a turn with my range, and also I don't think the fish really matters. I don't think they're thinking about their turn SPR at all. We get raised. Think about what I was just saying about our flop range. The better hands we have here are aces and queens. Now that's what, 6 combos. We're not going to be c-betting hugely wide here, but we're probably going to be c-betting king jack with a diamond, king 10 with a diamond if we have it pre, and possibly some spewy c-bets with whatever other bluffs we have pre. Considering we don't block diamonds, which are a good portion of his bluffing range, I think this is a spot we probably can't fold. With the king of diamonds, I think we should start folding here, because it just makes his range so value oriented. And he can probably have both queens and 9s, although queens is less certain considering we have fish opened and he has a 13% 3-bet, but he can have ace queen and probably ace 9 suited too, so I think we should be getting it in. Our blockers are good rather than bad overall, and also we have what, 19 left behind into 68 if we just call, so it's effectively a jam, and he shows it with jack 10 and diamonds. I mean, we win both runs by some miracle, but I think his play's okay. I think he should probably just be jamming the flop instead of raising to some size, which leaves a ridiculous amount behind. But you know, it's not a mistake per se. 3-bet king is against under the gun, despite the fact he's 13-6. It's only 55 hands, so you know we get cold called by the big blind, who's a fish. And just a standard bet. We don't want to bet too big because we get stacked in very easily by the river. It's a pretty wet board, but it's not hugely wet considering they don't really have many suited connectors pre. And we get called in 2 spots. Now that's a bit tricky. On this turn I think we should still be betting. I think the optimal bet size here is about 15. It clearly makes it a bad call with draws considering we don't really have much behind, and we can bluff with draws ourselves considering we don't expect them to have much raising range large raising ranges for that size. So I think I'd like to see that a bit bigger, but I think 13 is not terrible. We do leave more behind for the river to more convincingly have a bluffing range, which isn't terrible. Now this river is a terrible card. I mean, it could be worse, it could be the jack of spades, in which case we just think, oh crap, we are never ahead. But certainly a lot of hands in our opponent's range are stronger than ours. So, when our opponent donk jams the river, I think we should be folding. I just think it's a pretty easy fold. Especially considering a fish is going to pretty much do this whenever the river trips. So I used to call these justifying this as kings is so high in my range, but especially considering we did have the king of spades, and thus block some flush draws and potential bluffs. I just think you're losing so much in the long run making calls here, despite the great odds you're getting, etc., etc. Nine's under the gun, get 3-bet pots. We're deep, so we can definitely start by calling here. Definitely check calling this flop. And I think it's high enough on a range. I know this guy's pretty good despite him being pretty nitty. Definitely high enough in our range that we should be calling this turn 2, I think, and be river top boats, which is clearly pretty lucky. I think check jamming is the best play here. We probably get called by aces with the ace of spades. I mean, and I expect him to be value betting over pairs nearly always. I also expect him to just fold so often if we start donking, because after check calling this flop, we shouldn't really have any bluffs on this river. So I think check raising is the best play. Somehow he checks behind with the king of spades, which I just don't understand. He might get called by tens through queens. We don't have that many better hands. I mean, especially considering there are blockers to all the sets on the board. He blocks flushes. I mean, I suppose queens through tens is only 18 combos, and we might not always call with tens, but I guess it's pretty close on his bottom. He probably wants to bet pretty small if he does bet. So, yeah, I think certainly, given this information, we should probably be developing a donking range on the river, because we don't expect us to be betting nearly often enough to justify wanting check raising range. But it wasn't to be, and I think most players at 50 NL are probably actually going to bet call that river if we check jam with the king of spades. So let's take a look at one more hand in this video. King 6 off in a small blind, always fun. I think that's a very marginal open given our opponent's 3 bets. Given our opponent's 3 bets once out of 3 times and called once in blind against blind. He is slightly short stacks though, and he doesn't seem to be that good overall, so I don't think it's awful. Flop seems a pretty easy see bet with every backdoor in the world. Turn we... Oh, I remember this hand, this one's fun. Turn, I think I overbet. Yeah, I do. The reason why we overbet this turn is because he's pretty capped after just calling his flop. He should be raising most sets on the flop. In fact, he should be raising all 2 pair plus on the flop, so he's capped at 10. Here. Possibly 7-6, but there's not a whole bunch of combos of that, and also we block it. We also have 7-6, we have all sets, we have 10-4 suited we probably have, I'm not sure about 10-3 suited, 10-5 suited we have aces 3 jacks and he doesn't, so we clearly have the range advantage here. We have a whole bunch of hands we can value bet for any size, and also we have equity to fall back on. It's going to be very tough for him to raise any hands against this sizing. I mean, I think if you jump 6-7 that's probably a mistake. So yeah, he decides to call, and there's something to note about this hand is he snap called, which makes me think he didn't notice the bad sizing, and I think probably after he snap called he looks back and thought, ooh crikey, he overbet, maybe I shouldn't have called that. And I think in general people at 50NL will fold too much to overbets and subsequent bets. When the river completes a flush, I expect him to probably raise a lot of flush draws on a flop, fold a lot of flush draws to have a bet on the turn, although the snap call reduces the amount of those. We do block some flush draws as well, and we have absolutely no showdown value, so I think this is a spot where we probably want to be jamming the river, especially considering he's probably going to be capable of folding possibly as strong as 2 pair here, Jack 10. So I think this is a pretty decent river bluff, and he does fold. Okay guys, I've been a TheDefinitiveArticle for Grinder School. I hope you've enjoyed this. Feel free to ask any questions in the thread. I am currently offering private coaching at a rate of $25 an hour, and I'm looking for new students. If you like what you see here, if you like the idea of a more theoretical approach to the game, I'm your man. And get in touch. Cheers. Good luck at the tables.